Okay, so welcome everyone. This is our fifth class in the chapter 6 of Master Shantideva on patience. So let's go ahead and get started by reciting the prayers that we normally do. We're going to do the homage to Shakimuni Buddha once, as we did last week. Rather than recite it 3 times, I think we'll just cut back a little bit on the prayers to give us a little bit more teaching time. So you can think of all the amazing qualities of the Buddha as you recite this, and think that you too have the potential to achieve all these qualities that we're praising in the Buddha. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. Then let's go ahead and do the, short mandala offering. Again, we'll just do this in English, and the idea behind it is that you're visualizing the entire world transformed into a beautiful paradise, everything, of a pristine, pure nature. Even imagining all the beautiful things that already exist in this world brought to their apex. So we're making this vast, pure offering to all the holy beings so we can realize especially this topic of patience, as well as all the practices, the perfections of a bodhisattva, and achieve enlightenment quickly. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niryata Yami. Then we do refuge and bodhicitta before the teaching, the first 2 lines pertaining to that idea of finding safe direction, refuge in the 3 jewels, especially the Dharma. And then the last 2 lines where we recognize that we can make the best use of this time gathering together to engage in our study of the Dharma. By having the motivation of bodhicitta, the wish to become a Buddha for the sake of all beings. And we'll meditate on that mind shortly, but now let's bring those 2 thoughts to mind as we recite this first in English and then twice in the Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la, jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi, daki chanyen gi pe sanam gi, dola penchir sangye drupar shog. Sangye chodang soki choknam la, jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi, Daki Chunyan Gi Pe Sonam Gi Dola Panchir Sangye Drupar Shog. All right, let's do a short meditation then. Before we begin, give ourselves a chance to focus the mind a bit using the breath as a meditation object. And no doubt you have a way that you already work with the breath, so you can do that for the next few minutes in silence. And then after that meditation, I'll lead you in a short reflection to renew our bodhicitta motivation. So again, with our meditation on the breath, just try to keep your awareness there. Whenever the mind wanders away and we see that that's happened, just gently guide the mind back to the breath. So let me get my little ringer here and I'll ring the bell to begin the meditation period. So now let's set our motivation together. And to do this tonight, I want each of you to recall, when you were younger, maybe even quite young, and you first, received that advice from your parents to be patient. No doubt we all heard that many, many times when we were young, growing up. And even as adults, no doubt other people have told us that we need to be patient. But rarely do people give the advice on how to be patient. In this gem of a chapter within this beautiful text, we have Master Shantideva giving us everything that we need to use to help to practice patience by using our intellect, our reasoning, our understanding of things at both a conventional level as well as an ultimate level. We have the ability to undermine our anger and practice that undisturbed mind of patience. So while, again, it's very easy to tell somebody to be patient, to practice patience is a whole nother level of commitment. So as we begin to engage in, especially some of these very instrumental teachings and helping us to practice patience when we're being harmed by others, it's good to bring a very powerful motivation to these teachings. To recognize that we're not just doing this work, examining patients, trying to put these teachings into practice ourselves for our own benefit, though certainly that's where it starts, is to recognize that when we abandon the mind of anger, we then stop causing our own future harm. Karmically, everything shifts. But moreover, we stop harming others. We stop getting entangled with them karmically and continuing to perpetuate cycles of suffering. And eventually, if we practice patience to the greatest degree, along with the other perfections, the paramitas, we can attain Buddhahood and then help beings even to a greater degree, helping them to tame their minds, to control their own anger, to practice patience, and all the other things that are needed to help them to attain their greatest potential, their Buddhahood. So set that motivation of bodhicitta, thinking that you're here to engage in these teachings, especially with that far-reaching motivation, a desire not just to stop harming yourself, not just to stop harming others, but to eventually bring others to the greatest possible welfare, benefiting them to the greatest degree by becoming a Buddha ourselves. Okay, wonderful. So tonight we are, as I said in the motivation, getting more deeply into the third type of patience. Let me go right to the slides and kind of get us back grounded in the material. So we have this fifth class. We're going to start from verse 39, which is where we left off last time. The first three verses or so of maybe even four, I don't remember how many it was, pertaining to this third type of patience we've already covered. We review those very briefly. But we were in the section about stopping anger for undesired actions, and specifically stopping anger at that which faults the self, meaning those things that are directed towards us, ourselves, and that we need to practice patience in the face of those. After we finish that section, we'll be going on to stopping anger at that which faults friends, which causes our friends and loved ones to have problems. We can get upset and get very angry at those things. And then the third type, or the not third type of patience, but the third level of stopping anger is stopping anger when we're getting angry at those who are benefiting, the people we don't like, those who are on their side and what have you. So within this first section of stopping anger at that which faults the self, again, we've had these two sub-outlines. This second outline, we'll get into this tonight. I'm sure we'll manage to get that far. This one is actually just another form of self-harm, directed at us, but it's not physical. Tolerating the generation of suffering is the main outline that covers the three types of patience. Meditating on the patience that tolerates suffering, meaning kind of our everyday stuff we have to go through, the suffering of aging, the suffering of the elements, the suffering of so many different things that are in our lives that we don't have a whole lot of control over. And then meditating on the patience, it definitely relies on the Dharma. This second type of patience, again, is when we are especially using the teachings on emptiness. This is what we went through last week, and interdependence, understanding that everything arises through its various causes and conditions, doesn't arise autonomously. And we can apply that understanding as a tool even to help us to practice patience. And then the third one that we just began last week with verse 35, meditating on the patience that does not think anything of harm. When others are harming us, again, especially in this context, physically when they are harming us, when they are doing things that cause us, bodily harm, which hopefully we're not experiencing day in and day out, but nonetheless, we all have had that experience, I'm sure. But it gives us tools to work with regardless of whether it's physical or verbal harm. But nonetheless, we'll get into that deeper tonight. So last week we went through bringing to mind the method for compassion and the idea behind those verses. I'm not going to review them in their entirety, just really talk about what they're about. Those verses were essentially about the fact that when we look at sentient beings and we see how quick they are to harm even their dear selves through suicide or through things engaging in negativities that cause their own future suffering, well then why do we think they shouldn't be harming us? They're so susceptible to a mind that is grounded in that ignorance and not really thinking wisely, well then it's understandable they're going to harm us. So we should try to have compassion for them, but at least don't do any harm back to them, because that would be not really with full understanding of what's going on. That sentient beings are under the control of their afflictions and so on, and continue to do things that harm others, just like we continue to harm others, even though we might have a strong intention not to. Nonetheless, we still do engage in those actions. So this was the first little meditation on trying to help us to practice compassion for beings when they are harming us. So now we get into the next little topic, which I think is a really interesting one, and one that you may have encountered these verses before. This is stopping the cause of anger in terms of seeing that what is behind their anger. Is it something within their minds that is causing all of this, and going into a deeper investigation of that? If it's within their minds, well then is it something that is sort of natural to them? Is it something that is incidental to them? So the very first outline covers verse 39. Is if they were on page, by the way, 18 of Gyaltsep Je's text. And by the way, I assume everyone now has gotten a copy of Gyaltsep Je's text, but I did ask it to make sure it's posted on the Shantideva's website, so you can find it there in the materials with the password and what have you. You can access that file if you don't have it. If you still need instructions on that, maybe put something in the chat box, and Sheila or someone will get back to you. So the very first one, if childishness is their nature, then anger is unsuitable. So this entertains the first idea. What if it was natural for sentient beings to harm others? So Master Shantideva says, even if it were the nature of the childish to cause harm to other beings, it would be inappropriate to be angry with them, for this would be like begrudging fire for having the nature to burn. So if it is within the nature of beings to do this, if that is, what they're actually consisting of, that at their core they are beings that harm, well then why would we get upset when they do that if they're following their nature? It's kind of like, again, we look at the animal world and we often think that, if we have cats or something and our cats kill insects or mice or whatever, you might kind of get upset about it and thinking, why did you kill that being? But that's in the nature of that cat. That cats will always go after something that's moving and try to stop it and sometimes kill it and what have you. So again, this is the first idea. Now, is it in the nature of sentient beings to harm others? Well, we can say temporarily it certainly is, because we're all under the control of these afflictions. We all have our own anger that we're trying to work on in regard to this chapter. But sentient beings under the control of these, and that's why we use that phrase, under the control of the delusions, they will frequently harm others from that place, that kind of being their nature. But it's not their nature in terms of the final nature of beings. That's where we'll get into that in the next verse to see whether the argument of whether this is incidental. But these two verses are to give us the two options. And whichever one we entertain, we see that there's no logic to harming beings, because if it's in their nature, as we saw in verse 39, it would be like begrudging fire because it burns. Well, that's the nature of fire, folks. You you can't deny the nature of that. So let's go to what, I'm not going to read Gyaltsab for this one because it's very similar to what I had. Again, that's right, that's where I wanted to go. It's similar to what I had in your handout. Again, the handouts I put together because they were coming from a time when we didn't have Gyaltsab's commentary to access. So I was using another commentary that someone had translated, Abbot Drukpa Gyaltsen's Precious Garland. In that he says, even if it were the nature of the childish, who do not understand what is to be adopted and what is to be discarded, which is most beings, right? They don't really understand what they're supposed to engage in, what they're supposed to abandon. Or those who, even though they understand these, still have strong afflictions, like us. I could speak for myself, that even though I understand what is to be adopted and discarded, I haven't gotten rid of my anger yet. So if it is in the nature of the childish, of beings who don't know this or aren't able to practice it yet, to cause harm to other beings, it would be inappropriate to be angry with them, for this would be like begrudging fire for having the nature to burn and getting angry at it. Then in verse 40, he goes on in the outline called, if the fault of harming is adventitious, if it's incidental, then anger is unsuitable. So this is entertaining the other idea. It's either one or the other. It's either in the nature of beings to be angry and harm others and so on, or it's not in their nature to do these things. It's something that is simply incidental. It's happening based on various causes and conditions. So Master Shantideva there says, and even if the fault were incidental in sentient beings of definite nature, it would be inappropriate to be angry, for this would be like begrudging space for allowing smoke to rise in it. Here the analogy that's used is that space, which is naturally clear and free of anything and has nothing obstructing it, smoke arises in it. Well, would you get mad at the space because the smoke is arising in it? No, you get mad at what's causing the smoke to arise. So this, again, is more in line with Buddhist thinking at the deeper level, at the ultimate level. Many of you know, of course, the concept of Buddha nature or a Buddha potential. Essentially what the Buddha says is our minds are clear and free of all of these afflictions and delusions and things that cause beings to harm others and to cause problems in the world. Every single being, their ultimate nature of their mind is pure and free of all of that. This is what we mean by Buddha nature. We can talk about Buddha nature in terms of two concepts. One is the fundamental emptiness of the mind, the fact that the mind has no inherent existence. Therefore, everything that arises in the mind has no inherent existence and therefore can be eliminated. But the other truth in Buddha nature is what we call the developmental Buddha nature, which is the idea that the mind, being an impermanent phenomenon that is capable of changing, can develop into the mind of a Buddha. So you have kind of this underlying strata of what we call the naturally abiding Buddha nature, which is our emptiness of the mind, and then you have the developmental mind, which is the conventional mind that can develop all the way to Buddhahood. The basis for all of that happening is the fact that the mind is fundamentally empty of inherent existence, free of any inherent afflictions. Everything is there adventitiously. All of what is in the mind that pollutes the mind is only there because we haven't created the causes for it to be uprooted. Again, I frequently use the analogy of a glass of water. So if you have a glass of water and you put dirt into it, you can see that the clarity of the water disappears. It's no longer clear. You can't see through it. It becomes opaque with the dirt being put in it. But if you put that through a fine filter, the clarity of the water returns. Well, our minds are fundamentally clear in the same way. The dirt are the afflictions, the delusions that have clouded the mind. Those can all be removed. And that fundamental purity of the mind is essentially its emptiness of inherent existence. The fact that there is nothing inherently within the mind at all. The mind is merely labeled, merely designated, and so on. We'll get into those emptiness teachings when we get to chapter 9 in more detail, but we spoke about them a bit last week already. So again, we have these two ideas of Buddha nature, and they both support the idea that what is in our minds is only there because we haven't purified our minds. We haven't created the causes to remove all of that. So therefore, if we actually do that work, we can once more, or not once more, because we weren't ever in that kind of pure, completely pure nature of the mind. That nature of the mind has been there as the undercurrent throughout all of this, but we can go to that place of that complete purity. So this is just giving some background as to which of these is the actual truth. We can say again at the more temporary level, our minds are under the control of the delusions, but at an ultimate level, the delusions are there adventitiously, incidentally. So let's look at what Abbot Dr. Gyaltsen says on this, for this one as well. He says, and even if the fault of harming others were incidental in sentient beings, of clever and definite nature, it would be inappropriate to be angry with the harmer, just as it would be inappropriate to begrudge space for allowing smoke to incidentally arise in it and so get angry. You know, the only reason why the smoke is arising in space, it has nothing to do with space. Space's nature isn't to have smoke in it. It's that there are causes and conditions that led to the smoke being there, just like there are causes and conditions for our anger arising. You know, what's interesting in this first these first three verses that we're going into tonight, we're kind of revisiting this whole idea that we saw in terms of that second type of patience, that when we were applying the understanding that things arise on the basis of various causes and conditions. Nothing has autonomy. And this understanding helps us to work with the whole concept of anger, because we see that why sentient beings are upset and angry at us, causing us harm, is because of all the factors that led them to do that. And so we can have a deeper understanding of that, and also hold the awareness that if that being was free of all of that, well, then there wouldn't be any problems any longer. They wouldn't be harming others. They wouldn't be doing things under the control of those minds, because those minds would all disappear. So again, this is just the idea that we want to work with in terms of this section, and trying to develop that deeper understanding of how things arise on the basis of various factors. Therefore, we have to make sure that we're putting the blame where we should put the blame. And that's what this next verse goes into. This is also a verse that I alluded to earlier when we did go through that second type of patience. This outline heading is on, again, same page, page 18. Anger is unsuitable when the direct or indirect causes are analyzed. So this is that idea of somebody hitting you with a stick. So if somebody's hitting with you a stick, you say, if I become angry with the wielder, the person who is wielding the stick, although I am directly harmed by the stick and so forth, you know, that may be what your logic is that, well, I'm getting harmed by the person who's wielding the stick. Though the stick is what's hitting me on the head, it's the wielder of the stick that I am blaming for all of that. Well, then the logic in the last two lines, then since he or she too is incited by hatred, that person is incited by hatred, hatred is what's causing them to hit you with a stick, you should be angry with the two, or with the hatred. This is kind of an interesting translation of this. I don't know the Tibetan so well, but this, I should be angry with the two or with the hatred, it's a little strange. I'll read the Abbot Dr. Gyaltsen's commentary on this that goes into that. But there's another translation from Stephen Batchelor that I kind of like better than in regard to this idea of two. Maybe again, two can also mean secondary, as it does here. So Stephen Batchelor translates this as, if I become angry with the wielder, although I'm actually harmed by the stick, then since the perpetrator too is secondary, meaning of course the stick is secondary to the person, but the person is secondary to the delusion that is causing them to hit you over the head with the stick. You know, being in turn incited by hatred, in this example, somebody with hatred beating you in the head with a stick, then I should be angry with the hatred instead. You know, let's go to the real source of it. You know, what is directly harming you is the stick. You're not going to get angry at the stick because you say it's being wielded by a person, but then the person's being wielded by their hatred or their delusions. So what should you really be angry at? You know, we have to go to the real source of all of this. So opinion from, this is Abbot Dr. Gyaltsen's commentary. The opinion is put forward, it is appropriate to be angry due to harm by others. This would be what somebody is challenging us with. it makes perfect sense to get angry when they're hitting you with a stick. The response is, if I were to become angry with the direct harmer, then since I am directly harmed by the stick, the weapon, and so forth, it's appropriate to be angry with them. So you're kind of like, okay, well, that kind of makes sense, but I'm not going to get angry at the stick. I still want to get angry at the person. So then the objection would be raised, but they did not act to harm and self-power because they're wielded by a being, you know. The response would be, therefore, if according to your thinking I become angry at the wielder, then since he too is incited by hatred without self-power, if I get angry at the two or at anything at all, then I should be angry at the hatred. So again, the idea is that the stick doesn't harm you in self-power. It's always wielded by a being, but the being doesn't harm you in self-power or autonomously because it is wielded by anger. So once more, this is going back to what we saw in regard to that second type of patients, that we have to keep going back in the chain of causes and conditions. If we blame the person for doing this, when it's really their delusions that are behind it. Well, in the same way that we don't blame the stick, we want to blame the person, but the person's being wielded by their own crazy mind. Or as Venerable Rabina sometimes says, our crazy roommates, all these mind states that live with us that are not our true nature, again, as we just previously saw. That's kind of where this is an extension of what we were talking about before. Well, what is the true nature of these beings? Is it their nature really to harm? Well, no, because they're under the control of these afflictions. Now, again, we're not kind of letting everyone off the hook by saying that. We're certainly not going to let ourselves off the hook. We have to address our afflictions, but we have to have the understanding with regard to others to give them some space, because most of them don't even know how to work with their delusions. This is what I was mentioning in the meditation tonight, right? Most of us never received any instruction on how to be patient. We were just told by our parents or somebody, you need to be patient. Just sit down and be patient. As if that comes naturally. Well, we have to learn how to be patient, and most beings don't even have access to these teachings, much less the willpower to practice them. So again, what we just saw previously, we can recognize that beings are under the control of these factors, therefore they are harming others. And if we have that understanding, we can have a lot more room in our minds to not get angry and upset back at them. And if we're going to get upset at anything, get upset at the delusions that are the cause of this. So when somebody, starts beating you on the head with a stick, give them a copy of His Holiness's commentary on patience, on the patience chapter, and say, here, this is what I want to give you in return for your harming me. Give them something that will benefit them. I'm kind of joking about that, but nonetheless, if we can help others in their lives to lessen their anger, that's a much better response, because it gets at the actual enemy. The actual enemy is the anger in their minds, the delusions in their minds. That's what's causing them to get upset at you, pick up the stick and beat you on the head with it. All right. So again, I don't need to, I think, read the commentary in Gyaltsabje because it's very suitable, or I'm sorry, very similar. I was reading that and it says suitable in there, so I had that pop into my head. It's very similar. Let's go back to the outlines then, because that was this next outline that contained these 3 verses. Now we go into the third outline, which starts at the top of page 19 of Gyaltsabje. Considering it one's own fault if something undesired is received. This is where we get into the teachings on karma. And I thought I would review very briefly. I don't want to make this a huge discussion, but most of you no doubt have some background in the Lam Rim, and in particular the teachings on karma that are in the small scope, the section of the Lam Rim pertaining to how we get a good rebirth. And of course, that's where karma is initially taught, but karma is the fundamental principle that governs over everything that we experience all through the path, whether we experience good rebirths, liberation, enlightenment. All of these things are products of our own actions. So let's take a look at the sort of 4 general characteristics of karma. Again, these are in your handout. I decided to put in there just to have something that you could refer to if you are new to the Lam Rim and to these teachings on karma. This comes from Geshe Loden, his book, The Path to Enlightenment in Tibetan Buddhism. The very first of these 4 characteristics is the certainty of karma, that karma is definite. Karma is certain in that positive karma will certainly bring the positive result of some form of happiness, and negative karma will certainly, most definitely, bring the negative result of some form of suffering. This is definite. It is not possible for even the slightest happiness to be the result of negative actions, nor the tiniest suffering to be the result of positive actions. Here we're talking karmically. We're not talking about in the moment. You might, do something in the moment that is virtuous, but you end up causing pain to yourself by doing that. That's not saying that the karma of that virtuous action has ripened into that mental or physical, pain that you're experiencing by your act of generosity or whatever it is that you're giving. But the idea behind it is that karma is what we create in the moment through our movement of our minds, our body, and our speech, following our minds, and that plants a seed that then gives rise to its future result. That first general characteristic is that whatever type of seed you plant, whether it is a positive seed or a negative seed, its fruit will be in the same vein. You will get a result of happiness from those positive actions. You will get a result of suffering from the negative actions. Then we have the second of these general characteristics, the increase of karma. Karma increases. Now, people ask, well, why does it increase? It's just the nature of karma. Just like it's the nature of fire to burn, it's the nature of karma to increase. So a great result can come from a small cause because the energy of karma increases continuously unless an opponent force is applied. A small negative action will bring a disproportionately great amount of suffering and misery if it is not purified. A seemingly insignificant positive karma will bring a great deal of happiness if the karma is not opposed by a negative state of mind. Remember back at the very beginning of this chapter, we saw that anger is one of those negative states of mind. If we create moments of anger, especially towards a bodhisattva, we can burn up, extinguish all of those positive meritorious seeds that we've planted. That's how all of that's consumed. But nonetheless, karma continues to grow and develop. If that positive karma is left unchecked and continues to grow in our minds, it can bring about amazing results of happiness. The same thing though for the negative seeds. We can develop even greater suffering. What we experience in the moment is just one small suffering towards another being. We can experience unbelievable suffering in the future if that also goes unchecked. Therefore, we need to practice purification. Again, we've talked about purification previously, especially in the first course I did on chapters 1 through 3, when we looked at the verses of confession. So you might refer back to those if you need to have instruction on how to purify karma. The third of these characteristics of karma is that actions not done do not bring results. In other words, you can't get results if you didn't do the actions that support those results, the causes of that. You never get a result if you didn't create the cause. You don't get a vegetable garden if you didn't plant the seeds and till the soil and do everything you could to create that garden. So Geshe Loden says, if the cause has not been created, the result will not be experienced. There is no effect without cause, no result without its causal action. You may be surrounded by all manner of bad conditions and dangers, but if you do not carry the cause to be affected by them, a negative result will not be experienced. Everything depends on whether or not we have created the causes. Then the last one is kind of a corollary to that. Actions that are done are not wasted. In other words, they definitely will bring a result. A causal action is never lost until it ripens into its result. This may take many lifetimes, even millions of years to occur. Once an action is performed, the potential of that action to produce a result remains imprinted on your consciousness until such time as the circumstances are gathered for it to ripen into its effect. So again, as long as that karmic seed is left on our mental continuum, as long as we continue to leave it there and not purify it, these negative actions, eventually they bring forth their suffering result. And it may take many, many lifetimes for that to happen, but they will just continue to be there and will not be wasted. Of course, according to that second principle, they continue to grow as well. That's why purification is so important, to kind of snip it in the bud. If we nip it there and we get rid of it there, well, then we don't have to worry about it growing into something monstrous and horrible. So again, the teachings on karma are to tell us we're responsible for what we are experiencing. Those 4 characteristics give us the rules of how all of that is created and how it manifests. So now we go back into the text. We're essentially going to apply that understanding of karma to recognizing the fact that we are instrumental in creating that moment of harm. We're not like some innocent victim that's just walking along the street and somebody, even somebody we know, if they beat us over the head with a stick, they still, we must have created that karma for that effect if we're experiencing the effect. If we follow those four general characteristics, we see that that negative karma arose from its negative seed. It developed over the course of whatever time until it ripened into that. We wouldn't have experienced it if we hadn't created the causes, and we must have created the causes, but it's because it's not wasted. It's manifesting in the moment with us being hit by someone with a stick. So this is the logic behind it, that we're going to go back into the verses and use that understanding of karma to recognize how to not be angry, to be patient instead, and by virtue of that, have an undisturbed mind. So, considering it one's own fault if something undesired is received, the very first outline under this is the actual meaning. So let's go into that section. It has many subsections, 5 of them here. The very first one is, again, we're on page 19 of Gyaltsab. Considering it one's own fault if one is harmed by others. I don't really like the word fault, but I mean, there's not a lot of better words in the English language. The idea is that is the ripening of what you created. It is the ramification of your own past actions. Fault makes it almost inspire in me some feeling of guilt, and that's not what karma and the teachings on karma are supposed to do for us. They're not supposed to make you feel guilty. It's supposed to make you feel that you're responsible and take responsibility for not doing the same thing again, so that we can stop the harm that is inflicted upon us as well as upon others. So verse 42 is all about, this is your own stuff you've created. Previously, I caused similar harm to sentient beings. Therefore, it is right for this harm to occur to me, who is the agent of harm to sentient beings. So I must have done something that caused this to happen to me now. Of course, this is one of the results of karma. I'm not going into the 4 karmic results, but this is one of them. You can have everything from like an entire rebirth to a specific thing happening in your life. And this is mostly what we're talking about here. If somebody is harming you, either verbally, physically, whatever, they're doing something to you, you must have created the cause for that result that's similar to what you did in the past. That's what it's called. It's called the result similar to the cause in terms of our experience. This is how we normally think about karma in our world. It's very limited, the view of karma in a Western context frequently, because it's only looking at it from that vantage point. We might even get a chuckle sometimes when we see somebody experiencing something that seems to be the fruition of what they just did to somebody, maybe even minutes prior to that. Karma doesn't act that quickly, but it gives us that flavor of this is like a boomerang kind of thing. It comes back around to you. Whatever you do will come back around and cause you to have similar experiences. And it's usually not just one experience, because once more it multiplies and increases. And it can even be much more hazardous experiences that happen to us on the basis of something very, very small, some small harm that we give to another. But whenever we're experiencing harm in our lives, we have to see it that way. In fact, there's a whole text that's part of the basic program called The Wheel of Sharp Weapons. It's under the subject of Mahayana mind training. The Wheel of Sharp Weapons, there's some, 40 verses or so where he's talking about this wheel, like a boomerang kind of thing that you send out to cut your enemy, but it comes back around to cut yourself. It's the reality of that principle of karma, that we experience in the end exactly what we've doled out to others. So this is the understanding behind this verse 42. Let me actually keep it off screen for just a moment and go into Gyaltsab's commentary that's on page 19. He says, because I have caused the same harm that I am receiving now to sentient beings in a previous life, it is therefore appropriate that I now receive the harm that sentient beings inflict upon me, being the understanding. Practice patience by thinking in this way. Of course, this is one of the most fundamental teachings of the Lojong genre, the mind training teachings, is if we think that this is something we created, well, then we stop the blame, because you don't put all the onus on that other person. They are a party to it. We're not letting them completely off the hook in a sense. Unfortunately, they're creating negative karma when they're doing things that harm us. But we created the seed for that. So if the seed for that has ripened into that harm towards us, who's really responsible? We at least have to take responsibility for our share of that, for having created that. And we even have to go so far as to taking responsibility for creating the body that is harmed by that being. So that's where we go to in terms of the next verse and the next outline. Holding on to the body is a cause for suffering. There are two verses pertaining to this. The first one says, both the weapon, the stick, and my body are causes of my suffering, right? I mean, if you didn't have a body, the stick wouldn't be doing anything, right? It couldn't hurt you if you were just a mind, I suppose, you know. But you created this body karmically. This is another result, again, that fruitional result or ripened result that is the rebirth that you have as a human being with a human body that has sensitivity, that can be harmed in this way. So, as it says in the last two lines, since this other person gave rise to the weapon, and I to the body, with whom should I be angry? If in blind attachment I cling to this suffering abscess of a human form that cannot bear to be touched, with whom should I be angry when it is hurt? In other words, if I'm so strongly identifying and clinging to this body and protecting this body from that vantage point, you know, with some deeper ignorance involved in that, even that clinging and attachment to all of this, well, then who really is to blame? Who should we be angry at? We are the ones who have this strong attachment to this body and want to defend it. We are the ones that created this body, as we saw in the previous verse. Karmically, this is your creation. You know, don't blame anyone else for your body. You might want to blame your parents. Oh, well, they gave me bad genetics, or they did this or did that. But your parents, you chose your parents karmically. This is all karma determines almost everything that we engage in. We have volition. We have an ability to do something different. It's not to say that, again, we are entirely under the control of our karma and our delusions. But we continue to experience the fruitions of all of that, and we are thereby, producing these bodies that can be harmed. We are producing the situations in which we are harmed by other beings, and so on. So let's go to the commentary on this. And as questions come up in the chat box, please know I will get back to them. I just want to spend a little bit more time doing some kind of straight through commentary, and then we'll come back to the questions. Page 19 again. Also, for the following reason, it is unsuitable to get angry. 1, both the weapon of the other person and my body are causes for my suffering, since my suffering is created by the other's weapon meeting with my body, at whom is one supposed to get angry? It is unsuitable to get angry at the other person alone, because you're in this together. You karmically created this towards this person. Now that is ripening in terms of you experiencing that harm. The second point that was in the second verse is about this abscess or this body that it says there, this abscess that is similar to a human body. It's more like the body that is similar to an abscess. That if I hold on to this suffering body that cannot bear the slightest touch, since it can be harmed even by thorns, something as small as a small little thorn or a needle, at whom should I get angry when it gets harmed? One should think that it is one's own fault, or again, take responsibility for what you've created from your side. I mean, even acknowledge that, we all have different levels of sensitivity with our bodies. I mean, some people, I'm amazed, can walk around all summer barefoot and never even flinch at anything. And other people, I mean, like if I took my shoes off and tried to walk around outside here in New Mexico, I'd come in, I couldn't even walk very far. Trust me, it would be really painful. But, again, people have different levels of pain sensitivity that they have with these bodies, but these bodies themselves are like an abscess. They're like something that is just waiting to be harmed. So once more, this might be a little bit of a stretch for people. And again, when you meditate on these verses, I'll put together a little meditation for next week again, for the following week. Work with the ones that work well for you. That's the whole thing about Master Shantideva's chapters. He's giving us lots of things to work with. And we have to choose which ones feel like they will be more relevant to our situation and that are more tasty for us to sink our mind into. And then we begin to work with them and practice them. So again, this is one that may work for some of you to think that, well, you created this body, so that's a part of the equation. Anyone who's physically harming this body, is not to completely be at fault because you've created the basis upon which that harm can take place. Just like, again, we've also created the karma for that to happen in our lives. So let's go back to continue these outlines that are within this section about karma. This next one is, it is the fault of having craved the cause of suffering in previous lives. Because of all of what we've done in previous lives, this is why we're in this situation now. The childish do not wish to suffer and are greatly attached to its causes. Thus they are harmed by their own misdeeds. Why should they begrudge others? So this is the idea that the childish, which again can include us to a certain degree, even though we've been learning how to work with our minds, we still fall into very childish behavior. We don't want to suffer, but we nonetheless get attached to its causes. You might even, if those of you who were here for the study of chapter 1, when I did that in New York, or if you've listened to the teachings online, know that there's this harkens back to an earlier verse that was very similar, those first 2 lines in particular. Although wishing to be rid of misery, they run towards misery itself. Although wishing to have happiness like an enemy, they ignorantly destroy it. In chapter 1, that was set out in the context of developing bodhicitta, a wish to become a Buddha for the sake of all these beings. But this is the fundamental situation of beings, is that they don't want to suffer, but nonetheless, they keep creating the causes of suffering. So whether we talk about the being who's harming us or ourselves, we still are under the control of that level of ignorance, continuing to avoid this refraining from harming others because we don't yet see fully how we are simply causing harm to ourselves as well. Then let's go on to the second verse within this, and I'll read Gyaltsabje's commentary, the second verse in this outline. For example, just like the guardians of hell and the forest of sword leaves, so this is produced by my actions. At what should I be angry? Again, if because I wasn't in full charge of my mind, and although I didn't want to suffer, I still created the causes of suffering, well, then what should I be angry at? Because it's just like any karmic result. These 2 karmic results that are mentioned here, the guardians of hell and the forest of sword leaves, these are things that exist in the hell realms. The forest of sword leaves is one of the sort of neighboring hells that you have to go through after you've finished your rebirth in that particular hell realm that you were forced into through your karma. And then you see these sword leaves that are all pointed upward on the tree, and you hear voices of your loved ones at the top of the tree, and you go climbing up, and all the sword leaves come down so that they then slice into your body as you climb up the tree. Then you get to the top, and there's no one up there, and you hear the voices down below. All the sword leaves go back up when you're coming down, so that you end up getting cut by them as you go traverse down this kind of palm tree or something like that. So anyway, these are the Somali trees that are mentioned in the Lam Rim. These trees are a creation of your karma. Just like anything in our world is a creation of our karma. That's another result of karma, the environmental result. The world that we live in is even a product of our karma. Yes, it has its causes and conditions in the natural world too, but the natural world is a creation of karma. It is a functioning thing within the sphere of the beings that experience it. Due to their karma, they've created that world. So the guardians of hell, I found it interesting in one of the translations, I think it was the Shambhala publications translation, they said the janitors of hell. I don't know what the janitors of hell do, like if they go around and clean up messes and I don't know. It just was a strange translation. I'm not sure why that's there, but the guardians of hell are said to be these apparitions that you've created through the force of your karma that force you to undergo certain tortures and things like that. You don't actually get reborn as a guardian in hell. That's not like some special karma. It can be just like being born as the CEO in a jail or prison or something, where you're, taking charge of all the prisoners and maybe punishing them and what have you. The idea here is that these guardians of the hell realms are created through your own karma, and they inflict harm upon you. So the idea once more is if you've created the karma for all that sort of stuff, well, then what you've created the karma for here is it's no different in a sense. Very different experience, obviously, than the hell realms and what have you. But it's the same thing. It was created through the force of your not knowing or practicing correctly, avoiding the causes of suffering and practicing the causes of happiness, following the law of cause and effect, in other words. So beings themselves are really to blame, if we're going to put the blame anywhere, through their own, delusions and what have you. They've created the causes for their own suffering. So the commentary at the top of page 20 is, the childish do not desire suffering, but are attached to and crave the causes of suffering, such as killing and so forth. Maybe we don't crave killing. Some of us maybe crave killing mosquitoes or things that annoy us or what have you, but most of us don't crave that. But we might we might crave a lot of the other causes of non-virtue or actions of non-virtue. Hence, since I receive a result of harm projected by my own faults, in other words, this is the ripening of my own karma coming home to roost, and inflict that suffering upon me from what I've done in the past, what reason is there to take exception with others? It is my own fault alone. It's no one else is to blame. This is my own creation, just like the hell realms, all these various things are created through the force of my own karma. For example, if the guardians of hell, the forest of sword leaves, and so forth, which harm one, are not generated by someone else with purpose, but arise from one's karma, then one cannot get angry at them. Similarly, if harm is generated also from one's karma in one's life, then at whom shall one get angry? Since it is one's own fault alone, from now on strive in abandoning the cause for suffering. The whole point of the teachings on karma are not to make you feel bad about yourself. They're to make you recognize that, okay, I need to take charge of changing my own future experiences. I mean, it's no different than if a doctor were to tell you that you needed to change your diet and your exercise regimen and everything because they didn't want you to get really, sick at an early age and die prematurely. You would take that to heart and change your behavior and what you were doing for the sake of a future result that would result in more happiness, hopefully, and a lot less suffering. Well, it's the same here. The Buddha is just simply saying, look ahead and look at what you're going to have to experience. Because karma is certain. If you create a negative action, you're going to get a suffering result. If you create a positive action, you're going to get a happiness result. The choice is yours. The Buddha didn't lay this down on us like some heavy karma trip, for us to all, get consternation over. It's information. It's valuable information that we can benefit from because it tells us exactly what we need to do to create the causes for our own happiness and to avoid our own future suffering. So we have two more outlines within this section that again is still all about karma. The next outline is the unsuitability of being angry at others by relating one's karma to the cause of their suffering. So again, it kind of has this understanding of kind of what is involved in this transaction with this other person. Is my anger really appropriate? Because let's take a deeper look at what's really happening at that moment when somebody is harming you and you're able to actually use it as an opportunity to practice patience. So verse 47, and by the way, there is a word missing from the translation that you have, the Ziggy To's translation of the root verses. This is missing from that. It says, having been instigated by my own actions, those who cause me harm come into being. If due to this, they should proceed to sentient beings' hell, am I not destroying them? So if the idea is that if when you're interacting with this other person, even if you are able to maintain patience and so on, they are actually causing you harm because you created the causes previous to that. Once more, if we look at this idea karmically, no one harms you without you having created the cause to be harmed by that person. So you have made yourself a target for other people to harm because of your own past actions. Again, once more, this isn't meant to lay a heavy guilt trip on you. It's acknowledging what is really going on here. If at this moment, that person is harming you because you created the seed for that, well then in a sense, aren't you the one who's destroying them in a sense? Because you've set up the target. Karmically, you've said, here, I'm ready to be harmed by you because I created the cause many lifetimes ago for you to harm me. And then they harm you as a karmic response to that, because they don't harm everybody. Nobody goes about their life harming everybody that they meet. I don't think there's any such person who's ever harmed everybody that they've ever met. They've got particular karma with certain beings, and that's why they harm them. So we get harmed by somebody. We created the karma for that. We've set up the target. Now they've harmed us. So aren't we somehow indirectly responsible for their ruin, for destroying them in a sense? Because if we hadn't set up the target in the first place, they wouldn't be harming us. It's kind of a way to develop a bit of compassion and understanding for that person. It's almost like we have drawn them into this karmically. Again, don't feel bad about this, but recognize that this is what's at play. If we really take the teachings on karma to heart, that being would not be harming you if you didn't set up the target karmically, if you didn't create the causes from your side to be harmed by them. So let's go back into, whoops, let me just go to Gyaltsep Je's commentary first before we go back to that. It's fairly short, again on page 20. Further, having been induced by my previous negative karma, in this life, people that give me harm come into existence. That's where people who harm you come from, is your own past karma with them that you created. If through harming me, the person is now thrown into the lower realms or the hell realms, what have you, then have I not destroyed that person? Have I not played some part in their ruin and their ending up in such a miserable situation? Saying this to my mind, I scold it, say I have thrown them into the lower realms. Again, this isn't to make you feel guilty and horrible about all the bad interactions you've had with beings throughout your life. It's to make you recognize that that is another tool to lessen the anger. Why would you get angry at this person if in fact, through the force of your karma, they're harming you, but moreover, you're pulling them into a situation where they're going to create the causes for their own future suffering. You know, how sad. Once more, through the force of their ignorance and their delusion, but also through the force of your having created the karmic seed to be harmed by them. Again, once more, I like to use that idea. If you haven't set up the target, then there's nothing to be hit. And when you set up the target and there's a karma there, then they hit the target. They get the karma of having hit the target, even if you get the karma of practicing patience in response to that. And that's what we're going to get into now, is this little kind of argument that ensues on the basis of, well, but karmically, what is going on then when you practice patience and this person is harming you? So let's look at the next slide, the last of these outlines in this section. Anger is simply wrong and unsuitable. Yeah, I'm not quite at the section I thought I was going to be, but this is still following on this thread of other beings harming you because it's your karma to be harmed by them. 2 verses on this, verse 48. By taking them as objects, I purify much negativity through patience, but in dependence upon me, they will proceed to hell suffering for a long time. It's very similar to what we just talked about, right? I get to practice patience when they're harming me, but in dependence upon me and that interaction with me, they end up going to an unfortunate state when they harm me. How sad. They have to experience the karmic consequences of that. Verse 49, since I am causing harm to them and they are benefiting me, why, unruly mind, do you become angry erroneously? If we look at it from that perspective, if when this person's harming you, you actually have the opportunity to be benefited by that, to practice patience, to be virtuous in the face of that harm, well, then they're benefiting you. Although they don't intend you to benefit you, they intend to harm you, nonetheless, you are benefiting from them. And they are being harmed, as we saw in the previous verse, because they are coming into the sphere of interaction with us and they're harming us. They will have to experience suffering from that. Whereas again, we are, creating all kinds of benefit by virtue of practicing patience. We're going to get the good side of that, and they get the bad side of that. That interaction we're not looking at it correctly if we're going to get angry at the person, upset at them, thinking that, that's a worthwhile response. Instead, if we recognize we have the opportunity to practice virtue with this, and unfortunately, they're going to have to experience suffering. We can, again, once more generate more compassion for others. So to conclude this section, Gyaltsep Je says, further, by having taken that person as the object of patience, I have meditated on patience and purified much negativity. In dependence on me, that person will be thrown into the hells where they experience suffering for a long time. I am giving harm to the enemy indirectly. Again, we're not directly doing that, not intentionally doing that. And he is benefiting me. To get angry at a benefactor is mistaken. Why, you unsuitable mind, do you get angry? You should like them. You should have a feeling of endearment towards them because you see how unfortunately they're going to have to suffer from that interaction with you, even if you benefit from it. And again, that's where we're going to go in these next 2 verses that kind of give us kind of an understanding of how we should treat the benefactor with more kindness then, because there's no way that they are going to be benefited by virtue of what we do. There are some objections that are raised in regard to this. First of all, refuting, this is the bottom of page 20, refuting that it is incorrect that others benefit us. Someone could have the misunderstanding that because someone's benefiting you because you get to practice patience when they're harming you, that somehow they're going to gain some virtue from that. That they've done a good deed by being angry and upset at you and harming you with a stick, and therefore giving you the opportunity to practice patience. So let's look at what this verse, these 2 lines says. If I have the excellent quality of thought, I will not go to hell. Meaning, of course, I won't have the negative consequences if I practice patience, but the other person isn't going to experience any real benefit from that. In fact, Abbot Dr. Gyaltsen's commentary that once more is in your handout. I'm pretty sure I put this in the handout. The opinion is put forward. With others' negativities acting as a condition, as was stated in verse 48, the last 2 lines, even I will go to hell. Somebody's raising the objection that maybe somehow you're going to go to hell by virtue of causing that person to suffer in the future because of their interaction with you. The response is, if I have patience, that is the excellent quality thinking this benefits me, then I will not go to hell and I will purify my negativities. But on the other hand, in terms of the other person, refuting that it is incorrect that one is harming others, we might have the misunderstanding that somehow we're harming others because of our being sort of the target for them to create this negative karma. Verse 50, the last 2 lines says, if I am protecting myself, how will they accrue merit here? So again, these verses are a little dense to figure out, but this is the commentary from Abbot Dr. Gyaltsen that gives us the flavor of what's going on here. The objection is raised since the other party is exhausting the results of my negativity and benefiting me, as was stated in the first 2 lines of 48, they too will not go to hell. In other words, they will get some virtue from doing that. So the response is, if I am protecting myself from negativity through cultivating patience towards the harmers, how will those persons accrue merit here? For without creating virtuous actions, they caused only harm. So once more, let me go back to verse 48 and explain this one more time in my own words, because again, the commentary sometimes is a bit dense too. When we talk about the first 2 lines of 48, by taking them as objects, I purify much negativity through patience. We talk about the benefit that we can accrue from practicing patience when someone is harming us. The objector might say, well, but don't they get some benefit because they're giving you the opportunity to practice patience? And that's refuted because again, they're not engaged in a virtuous state of mind at that time. They are intending to harm me and having a mind of anger and hatred towards me or whatever. They have to experience the consequences of that, not the consequences of my actions of practicing patience. Only I am the recipient of those actions. Then the last 2 lines, which were discussed first by Shantideva in verse 50, but in dependence upon me, they will proceed to hell suffering for a long time. There the objector thinks, well, if you've set up the target and you've caused them to experience future suffering in a hell realm because of harming you, isn't that non-virtue on your part? Aren't you creating non-virtue? And Master Shantideva says, well, if you're practicing patience at that time, a virtuous state of mind, how could you be cultivating non-virtue? Yeah, we're just getting into this idea that karma is very separate, in terms of who experiences what. The being in front of us who is harming us, is the one that is going to have to experience the karmic consequences of that. We ourselves, if we are practicing patience, we will get to experience the karmic consequences of our own virtuous state of mind. Nonetheless, someone raised this point to me previously and they said, well, but does the person in front of you benefit at all from your not harming back? Well, in a sense, yes. There is some future benefit because I'm disentangling myself from that karmic cycle. If we really look at it in terms of karmically, what goes on is beings interact with each other, and based on their prior karma, one will become the perpetrator and the other becomes the victim. And then in the next life, the one that was the victim becomes the perpetrator, or some lifetimes down the road, that becomes the perpetrator and the other one is the victim. And then if they don't let go of that karmic cycle, they just keep playing this out, moving from the role of victim to perpetrator, and so on, perpetrator to victim. They just keep going through the same motions, but just on the opposite side of the fence. So by your making a decision to break free from that, you are definitely breaking that cycle. When you interact with beings, even strangers on the street that, accost you for no reason and say something or, throw a coffee at you or do whatever, I don't know what all happens to people, but, if somebody does that to you, if you have this understanding and you practice patience, then that you've let go of that. You aren't going to perpetuate that cycle of retaliating at that person, You won't even retaliate at them in this life, and you won't be holding on to the karma that will cause you to be the perpetrator of retaliating towards them in a future life. So I think there is some benefit to others by virtue of what we have engaged in, but they don't get virtuous seeds from that. They don't get the virtue of our practice of patience, just like we don't get the non-virtue of their practicing of harm. So I hope that helped to talk a little bit about that verse. It's a little challenging. The first time I read it through, it took me a while to kind of get the gist of all of it. So okay, we went through verse 50, then these two parts, these two refutations. Again, I'm not going to read the commentary by Gyaltsab Je because it is very similar. Let's go on to the final outline in this whole thing of objections. This is called Stop Treating the Benefactor Wrongly Then. Wise up and treat the benefactor with compassion and understanding and caring. Nevertheless, should I return the harm, it will not protect them either. As I was just saying, you're only going to perpetuate the harm and the cycle of harm that you're engaged in with that being. By doing so, my own conduct will deteriorate, and hence this fortitude will be destroyed. There's no real benefit to having a mind of harm in response to the person who's harming you, having a mind of anger and a wish to retaliate to them. That is not going to help anybody involved in this. So, this creates, as it's often called, a vicious circle, just everything perpetuating karmically. We even see this in parts of our world where the karma is there, in Palestine and Israel, right, where there's just continual generation after generation. And as much as there might be an impetus to try to stop it, even I was inspired many years ago by the younger Palestinians and Israelis that were trying to do it differently, trying to have a foundation for future peace. It's very hard to break free of that type of karma in cultures. It's very hard to break free of it individually even. If we're caught up with somebody in our lives right now where we see that that's what's going on, is we're back in that play of just continuing to create more and more of this type of karma back and forth and exacerbating our own future suffering. We'll try to break free of that. Do what you can to, get rid of that. It's a very short commentary on this. The argument is put forward: if the attacker is a benefactor, then one should also attack others. In other words, if harming someone can help them, then I should benefit them by harming them. It gets really kind of twisted logic. But you could put different arguments forward here, and the whole idea is that you're harming others doesn't make any sense. No matter what kind of logic you use. This shouldn't be our logic, even with our Buddhist friends. We shouldn't say, well, I'm going to harm all my Buddhist friends because they get the opportunity to practice patience when I'm harming them. Well, no, please don't harm your Buddhist friends. They don't want harm any more than anybody else doesn't want harm. And I'm sure they have plenty of people in their life that they can practice patience with. They don't need you as an impetus to do that. So anyway, the answer that's given is, when I harm the other person in retaliation, they will not be protected. And my own practice of the four dharmas of a monk and my promise to meditate on love and compassion degenerate. Finally, also the austerity of patience disintegrates. So there's only disadvantages if I were to play into some kind of logic, thinking it makes sense to get angry at this person who's harming me. It's only going to cause your own practice of patience to deteriorate. You're going to degenerate your bodhicitta, your mind of loving kindness and compassion. And you're also going to go against your four modes of training, or these four, they were called here the four dharmas of a monk, but I don't think they're exclusively for a monk. In fact, they are part of the Bodhisattva vows, the secondary vows. I'm not going to read Gyaltsab Je's comment, or I'm sorry, Abbot Drukpa Gyaltsen's, because I read Gyaltsab Je's. But let's go to these four qualities of trainees in virtue. Excuse me, is the translation of Getzal, I think is the Tibetan for a monk. So these are, again, in your bodhisattva vows, the secondary vows, that things you should be avoiding with regard to the practice of patience. When others get angry at us, to not get angry at them. When others beat us, to not beat them. When others deride us, to not deride them. And when others point out our faults, to not point out their faults. In other words, essentially, whenever anybody's doing something harmful towards you, stop doing something harmful in return. Retaliating and reciprocating in the same way are not going to get you anywhere. They're only going to create these vicious circles. Okay, so now we have concluded the three types of patience that are set out, at least in the formal outlines. The patience of that is willing to undergo whatever suffering that we have to experience in life, especially, again, things that happen naturally as part of life. The patience that is willing to endure whatever it takes to practice the Dharma, especially to understand emptiness and apply it in our lives. And then thirdly, the patience that is willing to undergo harm from other people, that can endure that without retaliating. So as I said, we're going to continue to some degree with that idea because it's still faults with regard to oneself, but we're moving away from physical harm. We're getting more into verbal harm. This whole next section is going to be about contempt and other things. So let me see how far I can get in that, and I will come back to these questions. So please do put questions in the chat box if you have some that you feel need to be answered at this tonight. The second outline within this tolerating the generation of suffering, again, was the 3 types of patience. Now we move on to be patient with contempt and so forth. This is what, about 12 verses. So let's see if we can get through a good share of this tonight. This has 4 outlines within it. The very first is contempt, slander, and so on. Do not harm my body. So this is the idea that, when we look at, there might have been some validity to protecting the body. We just refuted a lot of that through all the reasoning we use. But some people might still hold on to the idea, well, but it is my body, and I do need to protect this body that can experience so much pain. Well, all these things that are said to you verbally that harm you, they don't do a thing to the body. So what's the point? So since my mind is not physical, in no way can anyone destroy it. Through it strongly adhering to my body, through my mind strongly being attached to this body, my body is harmed by suffering. It's all arising through my strong attachment to this body from my mind side that all of this occurs. But since contempt, harsh speech, and unpleasant words do not cause any harm to my body, why, mind, do you become so angry? So even if we were to use some logic that it makes sense to defend the body, and if things do harm the body, well, then there's some justification in being angry, which of course Shantideva refuted. We don't have any doubts about that. But he's using that kind of as a touch point to go forward. These things that he's talking about here, when somebody says contemptful words towards you, denigrates you through their speech, puts you down, makes fun of you, mocks you, whatever the case might be, lies about you, well, they aren't harming your body in the least. It's harming, some non-physical thing, or our mind, our thoughts, all generated on the basis of receiving that harm. But there's nothing physical that's harmed there. So the first reason not to get upset and angry at when people are doing these things to you is because they aren't really harming your body. Nothing physical is there. So you can't really expect that, we already refuted all of that. Well, the same refutation could really occur for all of this. Even though he went through that specifically around somebody hitting you with a stick or harming your body physically. Well, it's the same karmically. Why do you receive contempt or slander from somebody? Because you created the causes for that. And again, if you practice patience in the face of that, you are going to benefit from that. The other person, unfortunately, has to suffer the consequences of their harsh words and slander and everything towards us. So here, Gyaltsab on the very bottom of page 21, he says, if I protect my mind then, since it is not physical, it cannot be harmed at all by harsh words, weapons, and so forth. The mind is never going to be harmed by anything physically or verbally unless we let it be harmed. We can develop the fortitude within our own minds to not be harmed by anything around us, no matter what somebody says, no matter what somebody does. It's kind of interesting. Viktor Frankl, who many of you know, who wrote The Man's Search for Meaning, he spent years in the concentration camps, and he came out of that with this idea, again, that even in the face of the most dire circumstances, the most depressing and pessimistic views that one can have in that time, we can still find some sort of impetus to move forward, something that can give us the ability to transcend all of that. That's within the realm of the mind. That's the choice that man always has. Mankind always has the freedom to choose whatever is within one's own mind with regard to whatever one is experiencing. So this isn't, limited to Buddhism. Viktor Frankl wasn't Buddhist. He had an opportunity, a really challenging opportunity, to practice the same sort of logic within the concentration camps. We can do the same within what we experience. recognize that we have a choice as to what our minds are going to experience on the basis of what comes in to physically harm us or verbally harm us. We can choose not to be harmed by those things, using the logic that was set out previously, but also just having this simple understanding. So let's go on then to the answer that's at the argument and the answer that's at the top of page 22. I don't think I read that. It says, argument, I get angry because the body harms me with suffering due to me grasping at the body. So we have this attachment again to the body and to being embodied, and we hear the words, and we there is a physical reaction that happens, but it's all caught up in this clinging to this as a self, this strong attachment that we have in the mind, and this self-identity that we are elevating to some degree that we think is being harmed at that time when people are saying these words to us. So the answer that Shantideva is giving us, according to Gyaltsab, is when the criticism, the harsh words and the unpleasant words do not harm my body in the least, then why do you get angry, mind? It is unsuitable. No matter what's going on with your mind and the attachment to the body, these words are not doing anything to your body. Remember when, as kids, we always heard that, right? Sticks and stones can break my bones, but names can never hurt me. Well, this is true, right? It's your choice to get harmed by something that somebody's saying verbally to you. If they're doing something to physically harm you, that's another story. But, even our attachment to the body and our identification with the body, these things aren't harming the body. I don't know, again, the logic's a little difficult sometimes to apply on some of these, but this is the idea that, again, it's just our mind choosing to be hurt at that time when we receive these harsh words. The next outline on 22 is, it is unsuitable to get angry at a person that is related to anger. So the person who is involved in that. If others disliking me will not devour me, either in this or in another life, why do I not want it? In other words, what are you really going to experience on the basis of others' dislike of you? They're not going to devour you, eat you up, and spit you out. That's not what's happening by virtue of others simply expressing their dislike towards you. And that's not going to, it's not going to happen in this life. It's not going to happen in another life. If I choose to be patient, I don't have, it shouldn't bother me. It should be like water off a duck's back, So here, Gyaltsab says, if the dislike by others for me does not harm and devour me in this life or in other lives, then why do I have dislike for them now? If that's not really going to harm you, why get here, so caught up in it? Why elevate it to that degree in your own mind when there's really no harm coming from that? Their dislike isn't going to do anything. As this only unnecessarily creates the cause for suffering, dislike is unsuitable. Now, as Holiness pointed out in his commentary, you can go back and read that. It's on page 61 of the older version. I don't know if the pagination is quite the same on the new version, but it's the commentary to verse 54. And he talks about how this verse shouldn't indicate to us that we shouldn't care about what others think about us to any degree. I mean, if we want, as Bodhisattvas in training, we want to be connected to others. We do want people to have a good feeling about us so we can help them, so we can benefit them. But nonetheless, don't get bent out of shape when people do express dislike to you. Not everybody, I mean, even the Buddha himself, right? His cousin Devadatta, despised the Buddha, even tried to kill the Buddha. Here was an enlightened being, and he still had enemies, right? Or had people who manifested in that way. Not that the Buddha had created the karma to have an enemy in his life. It was that, this cousin of the Buddha's just couldn't see the purity of the Buddha, couldn't see the amazing qualities of the Buddha. Well, if Devadatta is blind to the qualities of the Buddha, guess what? Sentient beings are going to be blind to whatever qualities we possess, whatever minimal qualities some of us have. So again, this is understandable that dislike is going to happen, and it really does no real harm to you. But His Holiness emphasizes that we still should be concerned about others. We still should try to enlarge our circle of influence by having beings who do see us in a dear light and want to be near us and what have you. The next outline does get a little bit longer. Maybe, let's just go ahead and start it. It is unsuitable to be angry at obstacles to things like gain. Some people may think, well, but if their contempt and they're slandering you and whatever is going to cause you to not get what you need and want in this life, well then, it's reasonable to get angry at them because they're getting in the way of your own happiness. As I said, this goes on for a bit. It's got quite a few verses, and it's in 5 parts. The very first one on page 22 is, since gain disintegrates quickly, anger at obstacles to gain is unsuitable. We have to let go of everything we gain or any honor we have, anything that is a product of people saying good things about us and what have you. We have to leave that all behind at the end of this life. Verse 55 says, because it will hinder my gain, I do not want this. This is kind of, again, the argument that's being put forward. Gyaltsab says, I do not like criticism, slander, and harsh words as they obstruct my gain. And also we could include it, my honor, people thinking good about me, my reputation. Master Shantideva continues with the reply, I shall discard my gains here and my negativities will remain securely. The end of this life, all of my gains are gone, but all my negativities go with me. All the imprints of my unfavorable karma, my negative karma, go forward into my next existence. So the answer that's given by Shantideva, by Gyaltsab, the commentary, is the gain for which one meditates on anger will be destroyed quickly in this life, and the negativity of anger will remain firmly in my continuum. It is easier to not achieve gain, and it is unsuitable to get angry. I like how he uses the phrase, one meditates on anger. We are doing meditation on anger when we get angry. It's a form of analytical meditation, but it's obviously skewed in the wrong direction because we keep thinking about the reasons why we're justified in getting angry at that person. One of the reasons it's being put forward here, again, is they're obstructing me getting what I want, having what I need in my life. Even if you think you're going to use those things for virtuous reasons, it's still no justification because you're going to create non-virtue by getting angry and upset at them because they're thwarting you getting what you need or you feel you need. And you're going to have to leave all that gain behind at the end of this life. So let's go ahead and look at the questions now, and we'll see. I'll have to go back and review this one probably anyway at the beginning of next week, but let's see why karma does not happen immediately. What about the karma with an immediate result that you create after killing your mother, father, or bodhisattva, making a Buddha bleed, or causing a schism is the 5th one of those. Those are the 5 actions of immediate retribution. They're not called immediate retribution, though, because you immediately experience them right now. Like if I were to, heaven forbid, my mother is still here, very dear person, I love her dearly. If I were to go there and kill her, and take her life, I wouldn't immediately have the suffering that ensues from that. Of course, I would no doubt have a tormented mind and all the things that arise from me having engaged in that negative karma. The actions of immediate retribution are called that because at the end of this life, if that has not been purified, one will immediately take rebirth in the suffering of the greatest hell, the hell of Avicii, unrelenting torment, it's called. Now, again, that is a particularly strong karma, and strong karmas can ripen very quickly. If you, again, study the Lam Rim, there are even some karmas based on the power of the object in particular, such as actions that are done towards one's guru. Parents are included in that, any beings who have a higher status for us. Those actions, whether favorable or unfavorable, can ripen much more quickly. We can see the consequences of things arising in this lifetime. But I think it's extremely rare, if not impossible, for it to happen like right after. Like if there were somebody who went to throw something at a person, and somehow through their throwing at it, it hits something, like they even have cartoons like this, right, where it ricochets off of something and it comes back and hits them. Well, we wouldn't say that rock coming back and hitting them is the karma for them having thrown the rock to hit somebody else. It is the consequence causally in terms of what occurred, the various points it hit to come back and hit them in terms of the physical world. But I would challenge that is probably a result of a past karma that was negative that caused that rock to come back and hit oneself, whereas the motion of throwing the rock forward to hit someone else hasn't yet ripened into its suffering result. I mean, why I say that is because if we look at some other karmic combinations, say somebody who goes into a bank, people still do this, bank robbers, and they take a lot of money and they get away with it. and they live the rest of their life, in some part of the world. They manage to get away from all the authorities. They never get caught. They never have to serve any time in jail, be tried for their crime. They managed to get away, and they made enough money that they could live the rest of their life without any problem. You might look at that and say, well, did the karma of stealing money result in their happiness? I mean, in a long-lasting happiness, the whole rest of that life, they managed to live off of those resources. Well, no, the resources that they got must have come from a positive action of generosity that they did in the past that ripened into them being able to get away with those resources. But the action of stealing those resources that got them to possess those resources, they haven't seen the consequences of that yet. That will happen probably further down the road, or will happen definitely further down the road if they don't purify that in terms of them losing resources, having things stolen from them, not being able to acquire what they need, and so on, even being reborn in a hungry ghost realm and those kinds of experiences. So again, karma is not that immediate or instant, like John Lennon saying, instant karma is going to get you. Well, there can be ripening of things that happen, like that bank robber can get caught, or shoot themselves in the process of trying to get away from the crime or whatever. They have an accident and die in an accident. All sorts of negative things can happen that might seem like the ripening of that karma in a more instantaneous way. But that's not how karma actually works. Though there are, again, these 5 actions of immediate retribution that have a consequence immediately after the life in which you commit them. It's just because that's such a powerful karma that it moves to the front of the line. Excuse me, at the end of every life, only one karma ripens to propel you into your next existence. It's the projecting karma that causes you to take a particular rebirth. Well, the laws of this law around this particular karma of these 5 actions, immediate retribution, is about putting that karma at the front of the line. All the other karmas you've created that could propel you into another existence, they don't matter at that point, because you've done that action in this life. It will take you immediately in the next life to a rebirth in those unfortunate states, or that unfortunate state of that hell realm. And then somebody wrote about the janitors. Thanks, Virginia, for that. The janitors clean up the blood from climbing through the sword leaves. Yeah, probably. I don't know what else the janitors would do. They keep hell a very tidy place. Maybe all kinds of suffering going on there, but anyway. So maybe that's enough for tonight. I was happy with what we made it through. I think this was good in terms of getting a good leg up on the verses to come. And I've kind of mapped out how far I want to get. I did want to get a little further than this tonight, but that's okay. I feel like I've got a little bit of room to move. We have 4 more classes scheduled, again, every Monday through the remainder of August. And then we will conclude Chapter 6. And I think I can safely announce at this point, Sheila has been in touch with me, as well as Maria, that we've scheduled Chapter 7 to begin the last Monday of September and go through October. It's a shorter chapter, so I'm anticipating 5 Mondays. We'll see if I am predicting that one correctly. I'm not so good at predicting how many sessions it takes me to go through a chapter, but just know that those are coming up on the horizon, and we'll have a similar format for that. You can register, and we'll go through and do the commentary on those 5 Mondays on Chapter 7. Chapter 7 goes on to the next perfection, which is the 4th perfection, the perfection of enthusiasm, or joyous effort, it sometimes is called. So, all right, let's do the prayers to conclude. No other questions? Did anyone need to chime in with a question rather than the chat box? Okay. Let's go to the prayers then and do the dedication prayers that have been put together for this class. So as we recite this first verse, again, reconnect with bodhicitta motivation, thinking that you were here to create the causes for your own enlightenment. And so that in that state, you can bring all beings to attaining Buddhahood as well. So now think that we're sealing all of these merits with that strong motivation, so that they will bring about that result without a doubt. Will be, kind of kept intact so that they can create the best result for all beings. Let's recite that verse together. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. And then seeing once more how that mind of bodhicitta is so powerful. Talking about the power of karma, they say that bodhicitta is the most powerful positive motivation we can bring to our karma. It can also cause things to ripen more quickly, for us to have the happiness of this life, as well as the happiness of future lives and liberation, as well as, of course, enlightenment. So it's very important that we make this strong prayer that bodhicitta grow very deeply in our own hearts, but also in the hearts of all beings, especially the leaders of the world at this time who, if they had these qualities of bodhicitta and were living with that principle guiding all their actions, things would be very different. Let's just say that. So let's make this strong aspiration. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Then seeing that we depend upon our dear teachers and we want them to continue to be in this world to guide us and others, we'll make strong prayers for His Holiness and Lama Zopa for their good health and long life, but by extension think that we're including all spiritual guides, wishing for them all to have these same results so that we and others can continue to have beings to guide us in our lives. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And then for Lama Zopa, you who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers, honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. Then finally, dedicate for anyone that you're holding in your heart right now. We all have beings who are experiencing various sufferings, difficulties, obstacles in their life, illness, maybe even know those who have died or who are dying at this time. Make strong prayers so that they may benefit from what we've done here tonight, become the cause to relieve their suffering, and to help them to have all of what will bring them perfect happiness and peace. And may all beings find true happiness and peace through what we've done here tonight. Wonderful. Thank you all so much. It's always so good to see you every Monday. And so I'll look forward to next Monday again. Thanks for joining in this special class that I was able to do this week. Really enjoyed my time with all of you. So good.
Thank
bye.
you. Thank you, Don.
Great class.
And there's two birthday people, by the way. Richard and Effie both had birthdays recently. So
yes.
happy birthday to the two of them.
Birthday.
Thanks, Don.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank